Outside the Box Reviews, we're taking a look at the NECA Alien Covenant wave of figures. Kind of like with the Prometheus last wave that I reviewed, I'm just going to do these all in one big swoop because we kind of got a lot of repeated characters just in different forms of evolution in this set, and for time constraints on my end, it just makes it easier to do it this way. So, starting from left to right, we have the Neomorph. Kind of somewhat in the center here, we have the Creature Pack, and then there in the background we have the Xenomorph, as it's called in the package, though it seems like this guy is usually getting called the Protomorph now, from what I've seen. Now, I will say that I wasn't a big fan of Alien Covenant, and as of this recording, I've only seen it once, back when it first came out in theaters, so if I do get some details wrong, I apologize. I haven't seen the movie in several months now, but as usual, even a lackluster movie, NECA was able to sucker me with some action figures, so let's take a closer look. And we're going to start off here by taking a look at the Neomorph figure. And the Neomorph comes with one accessory, which is, well, itself. This is kind of the burster form, I guess, the very tiny version of it. So, fittingly, it's a very, very small piece, but it is kind of its own little figure. We have its big bulbous head up here at the top. It's soaked in blood like it just burst out of somebody. We have the two spines coming off the back here that are rubberized, so they're not going to break off. The tail itself is also rubberized. No bendy wire in this, so it's not posable. We have the very tiny, spindly little arms on there, and his little crooked legs. Mine are actually bent over one another, but it's a very, very tiny figure, so it's kind of amazing they got as much detail as they did. And I think the blood kind of helps cover up any lack of sculpted detail there just by obscuring things a bit. This little guy does have some articulation, actually not too bad in terms of how tiny it is. The head will swivel side to side. The arms are stationary, but the legs are actually on a cut joint, so you can kind of move them around to try to pose them. I still haven't been able to get this guy to stand up on its own because the legs are so crossed, but still impressive that he has leg articulation, and then we do have a swivel there at the base of the tail. It's funny, seeing the Neomorph in the movie, I was kind of unimpressed with the design because I feel like I've seen albino alien looking things for quite a while, and then I realized that's mostly NECA's fault and not really something that's ever been on film before, because we have gotten albino versions of both the big chap and the aliens with that weird hentai tongue monster thing they put out. The Neomorph comes with two different head sculpts. Both are very similar in overall shape. We have the long pointed dome coming off the back. It's kind of a nice texture there at the base of the tip of it. Coloration on here is mostly kind of a milky white. There is some kind of darker, almost flesh tone shadings there at the top, and then some kind of pink hues here around the face to kind of give it that more albino look. We have the very butthole looking mouth there at the front. No eyes or anything. It almost looks scarred up, kind of around where the eyes would be. And there's a lot of great sculpted texture in here. There's no real flat space on the skin. Everything has wrinkles and folds and everything in it. So it's very nicely done from a technical standpoint as far as the figure itself goes. Except maybe for the seam that kind of runs down the entire length of the head. It is a little distracting. It makes it feel like maybe they used the same bottom section for both heads and then swapped out the top for the different looks. But it kind of hinders the overall look of the character a little bit. But we could pop this head off, and then we could pop in the secondary screaming or open mouth head. And I like this one a lot more. It's probably how I'm going to have him displayed on the shelf. But we have the kind of protruding jaw there at the front with the fangs. We have the tongue inside. The teeth are kind of a nice bone color, and the gums and tongue are pink with some nice black shading on them. Same kind of detail throughout the rest of the head. We get some more of that pink in here and the shading up on the top of the dome. No real difference from the other head, but the screaming mouth is definitely a lot cooler looking in my opinion. Going down the body of this figure, one thing I will say is it's a very spindly figure just by the needed design of it. So everything on here feels a little fragile, but I don't know if there's really any avoiding that. With the kind of sunken in looking chest here, you can see all the ribs and skeletal structure underneath. The flesh actually almost looks like it's, I would almost say, painted onto the bones, like it's very tight around the rib cage here, giving it kind of a neat look. Continues on a lot of what we had in the head, mostly that off-white with kind of the wash in it. No real pink areas going on through here. Going around to the back, we have the rows of spice. We got the two big ones here at the top. They're all rubberized, so they're not going to break off on you. And then we got some smaller rows here towards the bottom. Once again, continuing a very similar sculpt here with a very bony look. You can even see the shoulder blades popping out. The arms are very, very thin on this figure. They come down to these very long clawed hands. Super sharp fingernails on here. Almost look more like feet than they do hands, just because of how long they are. Going down the mid-torso, it's really not much to say. It's all that same kind of look for everything on here, but nice sculpted detail in the mid-torso. Another spine there in the back. This one appears to be hard sculpted, so this one's not flexible back here. There's kind of an obvious color difference between where the body turns into the tail. So the tail's a lot paler than the rest of the body, but that comes out fairly long and has a nice spike there at the end of it. The legs have these high hip bones that we've seen on a lot of other aliens. The ball joints inside here are really obvious. They stick out a lot. I don't know if it would have been better to do the hip joints on like a rubberized diaper type thing. I don't really know if that would have worked when it comes to articulation and all that, but it is really glaringly obvious that there's ball joints in there. Continue on that weird skin texture down through the legs, once again being very tiny. And then we have these very, very long feet with all the little tiny toes. And then we do actually get peg holes here at the bottom of his feet. For articulation, the head is on a disc swivel joint, so we can go side to side with it, as well as hinge forward and back. Because of its shape, there's no like side to side pivot or any of that. The arms are on a pin socket joint, so they'll go forward, back, as well as out to the side, about 90 degrees. We get a double joint here at the elbow, which is really nice, but really tiny. You also swivel on either end of that joint. The forearm doesn't really swivel so well, but the bicep kind of section swivels a lot better. I will say the right elbow joint came really twisted, so you do want to be careful before you start messing with the articulation. Make sure you can see that little disc inside there is actually on the axis you're trying to bend on, and don't force it if it doesn't want to move, because I can see this breaking very easily. You get a hinge joint there at the wrist, so we can hinge up and down as well as swivel, which is a lot of articulation for a figure this tiny. Get a mid-torso ball joint, so you can go a little bit forward and back, side to side, as well as pivot slightly. The legs are these big pin and socket joints, so you can go forward, back, as well as a little bit out to the side, hindered by that high hip joint there. You can also swivel at the upper leg, once again hindered by that hip. We have a double joint there at the knee. You could also rotate at the top of the knee. We have a disc hinge there at the foot, so we'll go forward and back and pivot a little bit on the peg axis there. And then one of the odd joints on this figure, the toes are articulated, but the big toe isn't articulated with the rest, so that stays in place while the smaller toes will hinge up and down. We do also have the bendy wire through the tail. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at the Xenomorph. I always try to call things by what the packaging says, but I am very tempted to just keep calling this thing the Protomorph, because there really is a lot of difference between this body and the classic Xenomorph we're familiar with. I was actually a little surprised getting this out of package. I assumed that NECA was going to give us a retool on a standard Xenomorph. I didn't really notice all the differences in the movie between this version and the classic one, but I think NECA's given us a almost, if not completely new figure from the ground up, so that's kind of exciting. I think the head may be a reused part. It looks very, very similar to the standard Xenomorph head that we've gotten before. We have the kind of biomechanical detail throughout the back. Even though it's one of the few spots in this figure I'll say biomechanical, because there's really not a lot of it here. We of course have the membranes around the jaw. We have the silver teeth, which I think they were actually supposed to be a little more bony looking in the movie. I'll have to go back and watch. I thought they were less metallic there. We can see through the dome. You have the standard big chap looking skeleton eyes back there, and then all that detail underneath the dome. The dome's a nice kind of translucent brown, and there's no kind of milky areas like NECA's done in the past. It's all a solid translucence, if that makes any sense. There's nothing obscuring your view of what's underneath besides just the tint. But a lot of good detail in there. We of course can open up the jaw and reveal the inner mouth, and that is very, very hard to get out of there on mine. But the tongue seems longer than normal. It seems quite a bit longer actually. And then we have those silver teeth once again there at the end of it. Going down the figure, rather than the large kind of shoulder pieces we've got in the past, we kind of just have this one tube on either side. It has the same kind of shape as the standard shoulder part on a Xenomorph, but it's hollow inside. It's just this looping bone structure, I guess. The body itself is very reminiscent of what I was talking about on the Neomorph. We have kind of a skeletal structure. It almost looks like the skin was like painted over that skeletal structure. It's very, very tight, either above it or even kind of below it, as you can see through the rib cage section here. It's more of an exoskeleton out here, I guess, with little bits of skin over top. Going around to the back, once again we got the shoulder blades there, more of that rib cage section and the spine. We do have the tubes coming off the back. These aren't really flexible. They're very actually rigid on there. I was thinking maybe these would have some kind of articulation or could be moved, because in the movie it looks like they go out to the side more, especially that scene where he's on top of the cockpit of the dropship that's in the trailers and everything. they all seem to be pointing more sideways, and these come very, very straight off the back of the figure. So I'll have to check it out again, but I'm not sure if that's entirely accurate. The arms look way more biological than any Xenomorph we've ever seen. It actually looks more like muscles and tendons without skin on them. More of that detail down the forearm. The hand is very skeletal and spindly looking. We have the one thumb, and basically just more human looking fingers, except that we have 6 of them total. But definitely a more human hand than we've ever gotten on a Xenomorph that I can think of. Same deal going on the other side here. We have that muscle detail going down into the hips. Once again, this section is rubberized to be the quote-unquote diaper, as I always call it. We have the muscle texture continuing down through the legs. Very unique looking. We even have some veins through here. The coloration for this whole thing appears to be kind of very heavy brown dry brushing over a black figure. So all the raised sections have this light brown throughout them, and then the recesses are very, very dark black. Continuing down the legs, more of the same, and then we have his big Xenomorph feet, very short toes, and we do have peg holes there right below the toes, not on the flat part like the Neomorph. And the tail back here may be taken from another alien figure, I'm not entirely sure, but we do have the kind of spinal ridge going down the back, and then we end here at the end with a nice little scalpel blade. For articulation, I think we have the same kind of disc hinge we have on the Neomorph at the base of the neck, so you can look up and down. You can rotate a little bit side to side, hindered by these shoulder pieces. There's no real pivot side to side on the head. The jaw, of course, is hinged, and we have the retractable tongue, which I already showed. The arms have pin and socket joints at the shoulder, so you can go forward and back, as well as out to the side, a decent amount there. We also have double joints here at the elbows, very similar to the Neomorph, a very spindly, tiny joint, so I would be very careful with it. You can rotate at the top of that joint as well as at the bottom. The hands are on a swivel and hinge, so you can go side to side with them as well as up and down. Ball joint here at the mid-torso, you can go very, very far back with it, pretty far forward. You can pivot side to side as well as rotate. The legs will go forward, back, as well as out to the side, not really hindered by anything, especially because of that nice rubber section here. You can rotate at the upper leg, double joint there at the knee. You can also swivel at the upper knee. I believe the ankle is the same kind of disc hinge system, so you can go forward and back, and you could rotate around the peg's axis there. And then we do have a hinge there at the toes. Oh, and last but not least, of course, we do have a bendy wire here through the tail. And last but not least, we have the Creature Pack, which is a little bit of everything. We have an open and closed version of the egg, we got 2 face huggers, we have the kind of middle stage Neomorph, and we have the new chest burster rod puppet. I'm not entirely sure why that thing looks the way it does. So we'll start with our third incarnation of the Neomorph. This is kind of between the 2 that came in its single packed form. This is the more quadruped version of it, where it actually runs on all limbs. This still has a lot of that same blood detail the Burster one does. It actually looks a lot more like the Burster than the adult. We can see he has a very bulbous head covered in blood. You can see the teeth there through the mouth, looking a lot less butthole-ish right now. The head also hasn't evolved into that sharp spike yet, but we do have some black detail kind of washed in here as well, which is kind of nice. And of course, covered in blood. We have the very rib cage looking front here. Very, very skinny figure, and you can see at the back you have the spine ridge, and then a very obvious section where they glued in the rubberized spikes here. We have the high hips sculpted into the body this time, and the legs being a separate piece. The arms are very, very skinny, with the same kind of hand that we have on the adult. And the back, we have the big toe off to the side on the back. So does it switch sides, or are the feet on my Neomorph backwards? I'm kind of confused now, because this makes a lot more sense with what we saw, but I also don't think it would make sense if the adult was switched either, so I'm just a little confused on the evolution of this creature as it grows up. We don't have any peg holes or anything underneath, and then we do of course have the tail coming off the back here. I guess there's kind of a hint of the scalpel blade there at the end, but it's really, really dulled out. For articulation, the head is on a ball joint, so you can rotate side to side, go forward, back, pivot, any which way you want to move it. The arms look to be on pin and socket joints, so they'll go forward and backwards, and I assume out to the side. Mine don't really want to move out to the side, and I'm not going to force them. So I'm just going to leave them just as swivel joints right now until I could heat them up and move them out. But it does appear that there's a disc inside at the armpit, so I think it should be able to move in and out a little bit. The hind legs are on ball joints, so they can move a little bit forward and back, a little bit in and out. They do tend to pop off if you're not too careful with them. And then the knees have a single hinge joint as well as a swivel. We also do get a bendy wire here at the bottom of the tail, but about a third of the tail has no bendy wire in it, so you can really just bend this back part, and you can also swivel where it attaches to the body. The eggs are definitely very different looking than what we've gotten before. I don't have one handy to compare with, but they're definitely a bit taller, a bit pointier. The details on here are very interesting looking, kind of these big loops of almost a bone looking structure going throughout it. It kind of has a nice iridescence on it. It's mostly a dark brown, but there's kind of almost a purpley brown brought in, and then some blue highlighting throughout, giving it a unique look. The bottom is pretty tiny, but it is flat, so it should stand up just fine in your display. And you can see we have the 4 seams starting about midway up and connecting there at the top where it would open. And then we have the separate one that is open, so you can see the kind of petals of the egg peeling back. And kind of an interesting looking inside. It's kind of a maroon color with some pink veins going through it. Definitely unique looking. It kind of reminds me of the Demogorgon from Stranger Things a little bit. But an interesting looking egg, definitely unique to Alien Covenant. And then we do get 2 face huggers, so you could put one inside the opening egg if you want. The face huggers are the same, so I'll just review one of the 2 that came in this pack. They are different from the standard release face hugger. I was happy to see that. The legs appear to be a little more spindly on here, kind of matching everything in Covenant being more skinny and spindly. But I think you could fudge this into a normal Aliens display. It's close enough that if for some reason you wanted to have this as your face hugger, I think it would work. I think these kind of air sacs or whatever they are back here are a little more squared off at the back than usual. It's a little more triangular shape too, I believe. We do have the underside with the ovipositor down there looking like it looks. And the paint isn't really too complex on here. It's more of just a brown with some darker brown highlights to bring out certain areas. And then, of course, the kind of blood red there on the bottom. But it works. It does its job. None of the legs on here are articulated, but we do have a bendy wire throughout the tail. So you could pose it so it's running, or you could pose it so it fits in the egg, whatever you want to do with it. Last but not least, we have our chest burster from this movie. But instead of being a snake-looking thing, we have basically a mini alien. And this was kind of weird. I liked it in the movie. It was one of those weird moments that I actually liked, just because it looked like a 1980s rod puppet. And I kind of liked it just for that factor, but then when I realized that it makes no sense that a prototype Xenomorph would be more fully evolved when it hatches than an adult, and it hatches very, very quickly, but I won't get into the movie complaints I have. But this guy is pretty much the same color as the Neomorph. It's the kind of same white, but there's a lot of blood all over him. So some parts of this figure are just completely pink, especially the backside of him. But for being such a tiny figure, they did cram a lot of detail in. You can see there actually is kind of sculpted detail there on the head. The mouth is defined. The rib cage torso in there. The fingers are actually all sculpted in. They're one solid piece, but they are sculpted so there is definition between them. Super tiny alien feet, and then his tail. There's no articulation on this guy, which is kind of a problem. I wish the tail at least swiveled at the base of the body. It is flexible, but there's no way to even hope to stand this guy up just because of the tail comes down lower than the feet, and it actually has more elasticity in it than the figure can really comply with. So I can't get the tail to sit like flat on the ground and act as a tripod for this thing. It would almost be better if they would have just, looped it around or something at the base to make an artificial stand for this guy, because he just does not want to stand on his own. For a size comparison, here's kind of the weird evolutionary chart. I mean, there's no proof in the movie that the Deacon and the Neomorph have anything to do with one another, but they are very similar in design, so I kind of wanted to put them side by side here. And then we have our Protomorph, Xenomorph, whatever you want to call it, next to the more standard NECA one, if you ignore the coloring. That's basically their standard alien body. So you can see that one is a lot bulkier than this new version. It actually stands a little shorter, and then it has more of that biomechanical look going on where the new one doesn't. So overall, it's kind of hard to divorce my feelings of these figures from my feelings about the movie they're based on, but I think NECA mostly did a pretty good job with these. There definitely kind of becomes more issues with these smaller bits. The Creature Pack, I think I'm just less impressed with overall, so if you don't really need those little extra pieces, I think the Creature Pack is an easy one to skip. So maybe I'll give a not recommend to the Creature Pack. The individual creatures, the Neomorph and the Xenomorph, I will give a recommend to. The Xenomorph especially, I actually really like this figure. I do have a couple small complaints with it, but overall, I think they did a really nice job with it. I'm really happy that they didn't take the easy way out. They did all the new sculpting this figure needed. Sculpting I didn't even realize that was there until I saw it in figure form, so kudos to them for actually doing what they needed to do here, I guess. Which seems like a really lame compliment. Good, you did what you were supposed to. And the Neomorph, I don't really care about the character at all. I don't really like the design that much. But if you did like it, it seems like it's a really nice representation of the figure, at least in this price point scale. I'm sure if a higher end company did this figure, we probably would have more like translucent looking skin and stuff like that. But NECA pulled off the albino look pretty darn well for the medium they're working in here. So I think that one is recommendable too. And as I said, it's even though I'm recommending two of these, it's just hard to sound excited when I just didn't really like the movie at all. But NECA still suckered me in, so I guess, you know, who's the bigger fool here. But anyway, I've got plenty more NECA stuff to knock out here in the near future. Got a couple Predator items that have come in recently, including the Comic-Con exclusive Dutch. Also, as you saw in the size comparison, I have the new wave of alien figures. I don't even remember what wave number we're on, but we have Lambert, we have another Kenner alien, and then we have the Defiance Xenomorph, which I've read almost all the comics and I've yet to find that thing yet, so I guess I'll have to read some more comics before I shoot that review. And I do have some other stuff I want to get reviewed as well. It's just a matter of actually finding the time to sit down and shoot the review and edit it, as I've been pretty busy lately, so I'm hoping to get those out as soon as I can. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. Also check me out on Facebook, link below. Please subscribe and like this video if you haven't already. And until next time, this has been our Outside the Box Reviews. Game over, man! Game over! Like, please, game over for these Ridley Scott new Alien movies. Game over.